And the basic principle of process theology is that the Torah is not written by God. It's written by human beings, mainly men, with a godly spark, and that we need to look at it, or we should be looking at it as a document that was created and that evolves. So I want to understand, does that make sense to everybody? Okay, because we're all part of a liberal stream of Judaism. One thing I love about Wilshire, which is what Rabbi Leder did many years ago, was that he pulled out the Reform movement. And the reason he pulled out of the Reform movement was as he was feeling very encumbered by a movement that was trying to define his synagogue, define all of us, rather than all of us defining our own Judaism for what it is to us. As a member of the clergy, I never want to define your Judaism. I want to help you define your own. So process theology is a theology where we evolve with the text. So this Torah portion is very interesting, and what I want to do with you is go through it, and then I have questions that I want to ask that I think are very relevant to this time. Okay, so Pinchas. We started with Pinchas, and we
John, can we have the prayer?
Say that again?
Can we have the prayer?
The prayer for Mishaberach?
No, the Torah.
Oh, yes. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Herman. Let's say that. I was so happy to jump into it. I did forget that. Thank you, Herman. Baruch atah Adonai
Eloheinu melech haolam
asher
kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'hasok b'divrei Torah.
Torah. Amen. Love it. Okay, so we first heard about Pinchas.
Could you please say the chapter and verse where you are?
Sure. So I'm actually we're not in Pinchas yet. I just want to rewind back to the portion of Balak, which is where we heard. Okay. So in the end of the portion of Balak, in the end,
okay,
we understood that Bilam, the prophet, the negative prophet, foreshadowed a time when the Israelite men would sin with Midianite women. And the challenge is that you're putting a test before men. And men have basic instincts, and one of them are their sexuality. And when a beautiful woman stands in front of a man, it's very hard for this man, even a godly and a God-fearing man, to not be tempted to sin. Bilam understood that the sin was going to happen. And so we meet Pinchas, and we meet him because he saw that a plague struck the people, and the plague was that of idolatry and immorality. Does anybody here remember how many Jews were killed in the plague? Cindy?
24,000.
Amazing. Gold star for Cindy and Herman. So 24,000 Jews died in that plague. So Pinchas took his sword and he murdered. I'm going to use the word murdered because we use that word because the 10 commandments were already given. And one of those commandments was thou shalt not murder. We don't believe in murder as a people. We believe in self-defense, but we don't believe in murder. He slew Cosby and Zimri. Cosby was the first person, and Zimri the second, that were actually fornicating in God's presence in the Holy of Holies. And so by murdering them, he stopped that plague. So the first question to ponder is, do you think murder in that case is okay? Cindy, you're shaking your head. Why?
Well, I mean, it's odd that like God rewarded him very highly for it, that there was no trial, no redeeming, no forgiving. Obviously it was written this way to send a very strong message.
Yeah. So I have this amazing book, and I recommend people get it. It's called Studies in Bamidbar Numbers, and there's a whole set of books for each of the 5 books of Moses. And this is Rebbe Leibowitz. Nechama Leibowitz is was a commentator of traditional Orthodox Torah. And because Wilshire Boulevard is a progressive but very pluralistic synagogue, I'm going to bring her in. And in explaining why this happened, she actually makes an amazing point. And I'm going to read this to you because it's worth understanding. Okay, there's the Talmud, a piece of Talmud in Sanhedrin. So Sanhedrin is part of the Oral Torah, and the Sanhedrin was the high rabbinical court of 72 judges that started in the 5 books of Moses in Moses' time, and it actually is still taking place today in the form of a Beis Din. So when we convert people, when we convert Jews, we are taking them before our version of a Sanhedrin. Instead of 72 rabbis, there's 3 on a Beis Din for conversion. And then in Orthodox circles in Borough Park and Crown Heights and Mea Sharim and other places, they still have a Sanhedrin of sorts. And the quote here is, Bilam said to them, to the people Israel, and to Balak, their God detests immorality, the God of the Jews. The Israelites hanker after linen garments. Let me give you some advice. Set up stalls and install in those stalls harlots to sell them linen wares. When the Israelites were eating and drinking and rejoicing and strolling in the marketplace, she would say to him, the harlot, to a Jew, thou art like one of the family. Sit down and choose for thyself. Gourds of Ammonite wine stood by her. She, the harlot, said to the Jew, wouldn't thou drink a cup of wine with me? As soon as he had drunk it, the evil inclination burned within him, and he said to her, yield to me. She took her idol out of her bosom and said, worship this. He said to her, am I not a Jew? Said the prostitute to him, what carest thou if you're a Jew? Moreover, I shall not yield to thee till thou hast repudiated the laws of Moses, thy teacher. They went to Baal Peor and separated themselves into that shame and worshipped abominations according to as they loved. Okay, so that said, who has a question on this? Who has thoughts on this piece of text?
I'm not sure I really followed what you just read.
Okay, should I go through it again? Or does anybody understand this? Cindy.
My question is, what did she get out of trying to convert a Jew to idolatry? Why was she doing this? Was she told to do this, or what was her benefit in converting him?
Sure, great question. So all of the surrounding nations, and we'll take the daughters of Midian, of which Cosby was a daughter of Midian, all of the surrounding nations were told to seduce Jews in order to get them to fall in battle so that we wouldn't take the land of Canaan, which is now Israel. So,
Wait.
Yes.
She wasn't just a Midianite woman. She was the daughter of a Midianite priest, a chieftain. So she was a woman of rank, and she was being utilized by her father
Yes.
to suborn the Israelites to idolatry. And what's important here is this parsha then ends with the daughters of Zelophehad, and these are women who have agency, as opposed to Cosby, who has no agency and who's being utilized by somebody else for their own means.
Brad, you're completely right. And what I would say is we're going to get to the daughters of Zelophehad because that's actually the positive of zealotry, right? They had zealotry to say these 5 daughters, because in the way that the property and the land divisions worked in that time, if there were no sons and only daughters would not get to inherit the land until the 5 of them spoke up. Brad, you're completely correct. Now, what I would say on the side of this is we also know from our Torah that there was another woman, another daughter of Jacob that didn't have any agency as well. Who remembers her name?
Yeah, Dina.
Dinah, yes. So Dinah was actually, this is a great example of this. Dinah was given agency not through herself, but through Shimon and Levi, because after Dinah was taken and raped, Shimon and Levi went and massacred. First, they gave everybody in the town a bris milah, a circumcision, all of the men, and then they went and massacred that community on the 3rd day when they were in the most pain. So we don't hear, both for our enemies and even for our own people, we don't hear that women have agency in this time as much as we would want them to, right? So Howard, what I would say is if this was a little harder to understand, the Talmud is very hard to understand, but here it shouldn't be as difficult, and I will tell you why. The Bilam understood that in order for the Jews to sin, in order for them to for us to die, that portion of us to die by that plague, 24,000 of us, we would need to fall into sexual immorality. And actually, hundreds of years later, maybe 1,000 years later, the first temple fell in Jerusalem because of sexual immorality and impropriety. So we didn't learn that lesson then in Pinchas, and we didn't learn it 1,000 years or so later when the temple stood. So Cindy, you're actually correct. That we don't reward. So Pinchas was rewarded, but he actually was questioned by the rabbis because we are peace people. We're the children of Aaron. And Aaron was an Ohev Shalom, Barodev Shalom, meaning that he was a lover and pursuer of peace, right? So we don't reward this. The reason why he's rewarded but questioned is because he did save, apparently, the rest of the Jews there from getting killed in that plague. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I know he and future generations were given honors, but as Aaron's grandson, weren't they almost like royalty anyway?
As Aaron's grandson, weren't they royalty anyway? So that's an interesting question. Has anybody else thought of what she's saying? Rebecca? You're knowledgeable. Meryl's knowledgeable. I think Aaron, yes, they were Aaron's grandchildren and grandchildren. So yes, they were rewarded in that. And it actually goes on to say through Nahama Leibowitz that the rabbis actually had the rabbis who wrote oral law and Midrash, rabbinic commentary on that oral law, had a real challenge with Pinchas doing that. So they had to change something. And what they changed was they said, yes, he did it. He saved those people. However, what he did was compared to Korach. Does anybody understand why Korach and Pinchas have a comparison? Brad?
John, I really don't appreciate when you call on people. You
Oh,
know,
sure.
we're
Sorry.
a group, people in this group are, you know, if they have something to say, they'll speak up. I
Sure.
don't have anything to say on the question you just asked.
Okay. And
They
I
were
appreciate that.
They were
Thank you.
disruptors. They were both disruptors. Korach and Pinchas were disruptors.
Yes. And they were disruptors because they each had a zeal to them, and their zeal actually wasn't coming from a good place. It wasn't coming from the most pure place. So I have a set of questions, and I'm going to make a couple comparisons. So let's go with this if we can. So the first question, because I want to relate it to what we're going through now, is, so was Pinchas right to kill Cosby and Zimri? And what are the comparisons to be drawn with Israel at war with Gaza after 2 years? That's the first question I want to discuss. Who has an answer to it? Okay, so I'm going to say, from my study of this text, I'll relate it in the following way. Israel was attacked. We know that. And there's a law in the Talmud that says that because Israel is attacked, if somebody rises up to kill you, there's the law of Rodef. If somebody rises up to kill you, you have the obligation of self-defense. So Israel was attacked, and they defended and are defending themselves. However, now Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove from Park Avenue Synagogue, very well-known rabbi in New York, conservative synagogue, wrote an article, a piece on Haaretz, and said that after 2 years of war, he thinks it's enough. I won't say here what I think until we get a little further, but he's saying enough destruction, enough death. We as Jews need to go back to being a light unto nations. We can't keep this war going. We have to remember the hostages. So we might have, like Pinchas, had a reason, but after 2 years, our actions are not as clear that we're doing the right thing. Does that make some sense? Howard shaking his head. Why?
Sorry, I'm just not following what you're saying.
Okay, so what can I make clearer to you? Because I really want to make it clear. So here's where I'm going with this. Pinchas had a reason to do what he did. He saw that if he didn't do it, more Jews would die. However, 10 commandments say don't murder. He murdered 2 people. It was very brazen what he did. Israel had a reason to go after Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran. That reason is still justified today, in my opinion. Can't speak for any of you. I can speak for me. It's still a justified reason to do it. However, as more and more news comes out that Israel is doing the wrong thing, that we have actually been, we just killed 3 people in a church in Gaza that we didn't need to kill. The question becomes, when is it enough, right? When is it not only enough, but did we go too far? Pinchas, the rabbis say, went a little too far. Does that make sense, Howard?
I think it makes anti-sense.
Why? Why?
Well, you're trying to draw a conclusion about politics from this portion of the Torah, but you're starting with a conclusion, in my opinion, and then looking for justification. So it's really not drawing a conclusion; it's justifying.
I mean, okay, so I get that. People are there. You can critique it.
We didn't really know anything about that church bombing and all the propaganda, and what the IDF is doing. You're just undermining the Jewish people.
Okay, you know what? I'll take that. I can completely take that. The second question is, if we believe that Pinchas was right, if we believe in the text, if we are traditionally reading this text and we say, yeah, he was right, he stopped the plague, and he did. Was that plague like the last 77 years? Excuse me, not 70, I think 77, 77 years of Israel. So last 74 years of living side by side with people we know were against us, we know are our enemies. And did we finally, as Jews, just have enough? And we said, we're not going to take this anymore. We have to be zealots. We have to defend ourselves. That's the comparison I want to draw here, because I can see it. I can see it. I don't know if I'm alone. I've stood alone a lot in my life, but I can see that.
Well, you're certainly not alone. There are plenty of Jews who, before the Gaza attack, were already attacking the behavior of Israel in the conflict, and wanted to make nice with the Palestinians.
Yeah, right. And so we wanted to make nice with the Midianites and with the Amorites and with everybody that was surrounding Canaan that we were told by God to conquer. And the text actually speaks to what we are going through now, which is when somebody says they want to harm you, believe them. We gave during this parsha and previous parshiot so much of ourselves as a Jewish people. We actually told all of these surrounding nations kings that we would acquiesce to them, that we wouldn't go through their land in a straight way. We would go around their land so as not to bother their people. And still they said no, and still they came after us. So even though I don't believe in a God that wrote the Torah, I do believe that the Torah then foresaw what's happening, and what's happened, to us in the diaspora. So I want to go to what what Brad was saying before about the daughters of Zelophehad, because the daughters of Zelophehad are actually very interesting to me, not only because they spoke up and because they were rewarded for speaking up, but also because they had Miriam in them. And I've taught to people all over the country when I've done these classes that Miriam was actually the true heroine of the Passover story, because she was the one to which Passover is attributed to. Even though the Torah was written by more men, she saved Moses. She put him in the Nile in the basket, watched him. She got her parents back together when they split, and she married all of the Israelite men and women back to their spouses so that we could exit Egypt. And so the daughters of Zelophehad had the spirit of Miriam within them when they spoke. So I want to ask a question, which is, why do you think, and anybody can answer this, why do you think we don't hear enough from women in the Torah, and why do we take these 5 women so seriously? Rebecca.
I just want to go back a couple sentences in saying that this is really a very good conversation, because every year we come to this parsha and everybody always feels uncomfortable with the role that Pinchas has played. And what Jonas is doing is he's saying, look, this is an uncomfortable portion in the parsha, but guess what? Next week we're on to something else. But in reality, what happened in the parsha of Pinchas is happening now. It's happening in our own world. It's happening in Israel. It's happening in a lot of places. And it's very difficult to grasp the morality of what's going on. And that's why I think this is a really great discussion. And in terms of women in the Bible, there have been a lot of powerful stories of women in the Bible that we just never really even talk about, because there's so much to talk about in the Bible itself.
Yeah.
Cindy.
I have two questions again. Did Pinchas know that by killing them he would end the plague, or it was just a lucky reward? And the two people he killed were very important people in their tribes. It never talks about any retaliation by the tribes for the murders.
It doesn't. So the first answer, and I'll give you my answer because I'm only one person and I know some things. I don't know everything. I believe that he did know through prophecy that he was going to stop that plague, and that by killing them, he would stop the plague. Those two specifically. He had to kill important people enough to stop that plague. Everybody is important. We know that God created everybody in the divine image of God. No human is alike. But in order to stop that, he did have to kill two leaders in that way. It's interesting because somebody said something here, and I forgot who it was, that Pinchas, I believe maybe it was you, Cindy, Pinchas killed, maybe actually it was Brad. Pinchas killed a leader of a daughter of the leader of the tribe of Midian, right? So
yeah,
leader of
and the chieftain of the Simeonite.
Mm-hmm. So in that he killed leaders, he did know that he was doing it, and the commentators say he knew through prophecy. So Cindy, what was your other question?
Was there any revenge by the tribes for the killing of these two?
No, because they were so happy to have the plague. They were so, relieved that the dying around them stopped, that they would have done anything. And that, to me, it's troubling, right?
Yeah,
to
that
me,
the chief of the Midianites that didn't care that his daughter was murdered.
No, because the Midianites had child sacrifice. The tribe of Baal Peor, had child sacrifice, and that is what actually still happens today. All of the surrounding Arab nations, including Hamas, they use children as sacrifices. We don't do that. That comes from this parsha and subsequent parshiot to say we have the Ten Commandments, and from there we say not only don't murder, but we don't sacrifice our children to war and to violence. They did, and they really didn't care as long as it killed Jews. As long as Jews died in the process, they didn't care. So there's a lot of comparisons here, right? And that's why this is so interesting. So the other question I want us to contemplate is, these five daughters spoke up, and they were rewarded, with a piece of land because their father had died, and their father had died in the Torah portion of Korach. And actually, in the Torah portion of Korach, it goes on to say that Korach, he and his followers were swallowed up by the ground. However, his offspring, his grandchildren, repented, and they were not only not swallowed up, they were rewarded for repenting. So what I want us to think about, what I think about when I read this Torah portion is, I think that for me, as I teach and as I am in all of these circles, and a lot of people on this Zoom disagree with me, and a lot of people on this Zoom might agree with me, and maybe some stay silent. However, the question that I have is there any justification for real zealotry And can real zealotry go too far? Can anybody think about that one?
Well, obviously, anything can go too far.
Say that. Can you say that again, please?
Obviously, anything can go too far, including real zealotry.
Yeah. Brad, I see your hand up there.
Well, if we look at the text in verse 16, or verse 18 of Parsha Numbers 25:13, it says that the quote is, "Assail the Midianites and defeat them, for they assailed you by the trickery they practiced against you." So I come back to my point about Cosby being part of the trick, being used as being instrumentalized by her father. And for that reason, I have ambivalent feelings to what Pinchas did. I can justify what he did to Zimri, but I think he acted impetuously when it came to Cosby. And I think it's that impetuousness without really getting to the bottom of what happened here that troubles me when you're when you're exacting justice. We don't learn about Cosby's lineage until after she's been impaled. So we learn about it subsequently. And I think the Torah, in a sense, is asking us to rethink what just happened in those terms. Like, oh, well, maybe something wasn't quite right here by telling us that there was trickery involved.
Yes. And I think, Brad, that's really important to say. And what I would also say, and relate it back to Dina, is when Shimon and Levi came and slaughtered all of the men in that community, what they did was they went back to Jacob and said, look, we avenged her. We avenged her. And Jacob said nothing except for, you made trouble for me. That's all he said, was you now made trouble for me. So I understand, like you, and I have a challenge with what he did. I need to think on what you said in comparison from Cosby to Zimri more without giving an answer here. I like it. They separated the two. The question that I really, because the Torah portion ends with new leadership. It ends with Moses passing the torch to Joshua. And the reason that this is so moving and important for me is because the Torah really justifies every action Moses took until he hit the rock in anger. Because he was angry, God said, you can't be a leader. Jews can't have angry leaders. We can't have impetuous, impulsive leaders. We have to have leaders that think, that are strategic, and that are very well put together. Joshua was that leader. And because I always want to relate my teaching and my understanding of the text to present day, what we're suffering from, and I'm in the rabbinic community, and I see it all the time in the rabbinical schools and all of the time in universities and Jewish studies classes, and I see it in Israel a little bit. What we're suffering from is a lack of leadership and moral leadership. I can't tell you how many interviews that I've seen from rabbinical school deans to prospective rabbis, and these deans are so desperate. They're taking in anybody and everybody now to become leaders. And some of these people hate Jews so much. They're Jews that hate Jews so much. And the one question that I want them to ask, that I know they don't ask because I've talked to them about it, is, why are you becoming a rabbi, and what is your relationship to Israel and Zionism? And Joshua and Moses and where we are today, it speaks very loudly to the challenges that we're facing in diaspora Jewry and the challenges that Israelis are facing with a lack of moral clarity from their leaders. We need to pass the torch, in my opinion, to the next generation of leaders, and the challenges both here and there. We don't seem to have a good idea about who that next leader is. Rebecca's nodding her head. Do you agree, Rebecca? Does anybody have any questions on that piece? Because I think that piece is as important as Pinchas, because if we don't want what happened with Pinchas to happen again, it's about who we choose as leaders. Howard?
I'm not sure I follow. You're saying we need to cast the torch to the next generation, but we don't know who the next generation is. How can we know that we need to cast it to the next generation if we don't know who the generation is?
Great question. In my opinion, and very humbly, from what I know and my limited knowledge of this, is that, of course, that's what happens when we have an election in this country. We pass the torch to the next person, the next generation, and we hope and we pray that the next generation is going to take up the responsibilities and they learn from the past and history, so we don't repeat it, and that they make better leaders for tomorrow. I think
it seems just as likely that they'll be worse than the previous generation.
It could be, yeah. David?
I would say just as likely. Yes. I don't see any reason that they would be better.
One second. I cut Howard off. I didn't mean to.
Howard,
say it again, Howard.
It's just as likely that they'll be worse than not. I mean, what is the force that would make the next generation be a better generation of leadership?
Yeah. So I want to take David, and then I'll answer your question in the way that I can answer it. David?
I disagree that it has to be the next generation, because as Howard mentioned, the next generation is not necessarily better than the current generation. So therefore, I think the question should be, we pass the torch to who we believe is the best qualified person in whatever generation it is. I mean, if you're looking at the next generation who does not have life experiences that the current generation has, for example, the greatest generation, those who served in World War II, they're called, who my dad joined the Navy at 15 years old to fight in World War II. And I could not imagine me doing it. When our son turned 15, my wife and I said, Grandpa did it. So in any event, it should be the most qualified, and maybe somebody in the younger generation, say John F. Kennedy. What was he, 35 years old or something? He was, we adored, well, most people adored him. And whether you're younger or older, the most qualified, who has life experience, I think, is the best. Because without life experience, somebody may be too idealistic, not in the real world to deal with things.
So I agree with you. And the joke, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, is what I'm going to put here. Yeah, you're completely right. I've said before, and I feel like I've stood alone in this, that it's not, I don't want I want the best person for the job. I don't want intersectionality to play a role into who gets what positions of leadership. I don't want virtue signaling to play that same role. I think, unfortunately, what we're seeing in America and in Israel, because the two really connect, that since COVID, we've been living in a very Purim upside down world. The Hebrew is hafafba. We were turned upside down. We didn't know who the good and who the bad people were in that Purim story. And we do know that better now, but our world has so shifted that it's harder to see who's going to actually be a good leader and who is not, and who has our best interest at heart. And so, and that's this Torah portion, that's Pinchas, that he might have had a great idea to stop that plague. He didn't act well in doing it. He was really violent and brazen, and we don't celebrate that. We should never celebrate acts of violence and brazenness. And then Joshua comes along to say, because of all of this, I know that I'm the one from God. Because Moses gave me this mantle, I have to be this one to lead the people into Canaan. And I have to do it in a way that is very meted out with judgment and a lot of compassion and mercy, but a lot of nuance. And I think, in my opinion, we're living in a society right now in a moment where there's very little nuance. And the Torah is all about nuance, and it's all about grayness. And in that nuance, I think we want it to be very black and white. There are people that are living in Israel that say all of the settler violence is justified. Every time the settler kills a Palestinian, lights them on fire, burns their houses or cars, it's completely justified because of what they did to us. And there are then those people that say, no, you're not right. You can't, violence does not beget more violence, and we can't live that way. So even though we were attacked, even though we had to stop this, the question becomes for me and for you all, I think, how do we go about getting back to some semblance of peace and prosperity? At my table last night at Shabbat, I had a woman who said to me, it was very sad. She said this. She said, she's a non-Jew married to a Jew, and she loved Israel so much, but she, because of the last 2 years, doesn't see any good there anymore. And it broke my heart. It broke my heart. Because in one way, I felt like she was discounting 74 years of pure good and all of that Israel has done. And on the other hand, if you're her and you've come into this from the outside and all you see is the last 2 years, it's really challenging. And we have to hold both concepts to be true.
Why do you say 74 years? Well, doesn't that bring us to 1951?
So I'm talking about, my math may be a little off. I'm talking about, so Israel had its 77th birthday. And so minus the last 2 years, and we've had a lot of challenges, a lot of surus, but we haven't had, in my lifetime, so much surus, so much death, destruction, and anti-Semitism, that because we haven't had social media too, that I believe very strongly that a lot of this wouldn't be the same without Facebook's, Twitter, Snapchat, iPhones. When you guys were growing up, and when I was growing up, we didn't have any of those things. We just had our mouths and cameras that were, Kodak moments.
So you're saying that you're not taking it off the beginning of Israel. You're taking it off that Israel sort of ended 3 years ago.
I believe that the beginning was very challenging because we know that we were fighting in the beginning to even get where we are. But the last 2 and 3 years, and I would say 2, but the 3 because of the judicial overhaul and those conversations, it's very hard to sell Israel to people now in our business, in my education. It's very hard for me to say, you should go there. I believe we should go there. We should make Aliyah. I believe that we should keep, supporting the economy, no matter the case. It's harder now to sell that because of everything that's surrounding this conversation, right? It's hard for me to sell Pinchas to anybody because you could sell him to say, he was a great person who stopped this plague. On the other hand, he murdered 2 people. So how great of a guy was he? Any questions before we say?
But you're saying, you're sort of saying, well, Israel ended 3 or 4 years ago, and it's the fault of Israel. It's what they did.
No, I'm not saying.
Catalyzed by social media.
I want to say, Howard, I'm not saying it's the fault of Israel. I actually started this by saying that I don't think it's the fault of Israel at all, in that we were attacked. I think that it's the fault of Israel, not the people or the land, but the leadership.
It's what they did. It's what Israel did that has caused it to become now criticized by your guest of dinner.
Yes, it is the way that the leadership has responded, and not every leader, because we know that we've had many great leaders, but we know that there's a verse in Pirkei Avos, Ethics of the Fathers, that says absolute power corrupts absolutely. So whenever we have absolute power in the hands of one or two people, it really is never good. And we should all, as that text, question the government, never the people, but the government. Harv and
So when
Mara,
you say leadership, it sounds like to me you're meaning Netanyahu. We didn't use that word, but by leadership you mean Netanyahu.
I won't say his name in this, because I don't want to.
It's a name that will not be said. Yeah.
Yes, I'm questioning the top down, and it's not just him. There's other people too. I'm
Your
questioning.
basic lesson is if you read Numbers, you should vote against Netanyahu. That's what's the basic what message.
You should not. Yeah, that it's kind of like that, but I wouldn't say it in the same way you're saying it. Harv and Mara, and then David.
Okay, it's Harv. To me, Pincus got the local problem solved, but he didn't get the overall problem solved. He knocked off Cosby with the spear, and the real problem was her father. That's like Israel not going after Iran and instead dealing with the people around them who are weaker. They should have gone after Iran when they had the chance. So I guess that would be my message.
You're right. I think, and again, I can just speak for me. You were right. Israel knew that for decades the problem was Iran, and that you have to give the leadership credit for, including the current prime minister, that he understood that the problem was really always Iran. However, when you come in and then you deal with the tail and not the head, eventually you'll have to deal with the head. And the challenge is we didn't deal with the head for 20 years. We dealt with the tail. And all of the problems that we are now facing are because we didn't, I believe, do what was right in front of us at the time. And we built them up and we let them be, and we let them dictate the most terror. I believe that the greatest threat to America and to every surrounding nation that is peaceful is not white supremacy. It's not this president of the United States. It is radical Islam. It is. I believe that for my entire professional career of 15 years. But the challenge I have is when you try to say that to people, they will always say to me, you're wrong, you're Islamophobic, you can't say that. Look at all of the good Iran has done. And so I've come up against that, and it's challenging. So wait a second, David.
Yes.
Rebecca.
I agree with what you just said, and without getting into all the nuances and details, when you mentioned that person at your Shabbat table ignored the past 75 years, what about the past 2,000 years, that over years and years and different points in our history where the Jews have suffered incredible losses, anti-Semitism, etc. Now it's most visible because, and I agree with you again, with the social media, because that's what caused the riots and the protests and the encampments and colleges and various things like that. But having said that, at some point, with years and years and years and years, and then the Hamas attack on October 7th just catalyzed it, and whatever other things there are that led up to it, what have could prevented it going against Iran, that just was so horrific, and somebody took action. And looking back on it, you may say, well, at what point is a strong defense actually an offense? And somebody like Moses or anybody else, a leader has to take action where some other people may not. And you have to look at it maybe retroactively at some point of view. But and one other thing, in the part with Moses and Joshua, I think not the real lesson, a major lesson of the Torah is there's no person who's necessarily indispensable. Moses was our greatest prophet and the most humble person, et cetera, et cetera. He had to hand over the reins to someone else, whether it was Joshua or someone else. So I think that shows that it's always an ongoing process of leadership everywhere.
Yes, Rebecca, and then we need to do Kaddish, and I hope people will stay for the Kaddish because we need to honor the lives of those that have passed. Rebecca.
This is just adding another layer to the discussion. I don't know if anybody gets the Times of Israel, but there's a really good article in there today. It's titled, "Why Are U.S. Socialists So Anti-Israel? Scholar Lays Out Soviet Roots of Anti-Zionist Rhetoric." And anti-Zionist rhetoric from the Soviet Union started in the 1940s.
Yeah. Rebecca, I will say this before we do Kaddish. I've had, unfortunately, I want to say, again, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. It really is such a cruel joke at the moment. But I've had conversations with rabbinic leaders and educators all across the country since Mamdani has ascended to nearly becoming the next mayor of New York City. And I've heard reasons why he should be from rabbis, and I've heard reasons against it. And what I would say to them, and I have said, is the Torah is both a capitalist and a socialist document. Rabbis like Sharon Brous from Ikar can point to where the Torah is socialist and can point to her love of Mamdani, and rabbis like Rabbi Leader and others that are more conservative or more centrist can point to the capitalism and to where they don't find that it would work. And I think that the challenge is we have to figure out a middle, and we have to go with what is. We also have to understand that we're not alone in this. We have interfaith partners in this battle against anti-Semitism. But we need to do, and I believe my sermon that I give over and over again is, we need to take care of Jews first and then the rest of the world, because nobody else is taking care of us. Not that we don't have allies, but if we continually look outside of ourselves and we say we have to take care of everybody else around us, then we miss the point of this text, which is we don't have right now, we haven't had for a number of years, a strategic plan in Israel that works and a strategic plan for North American Jewry that keeps people entertained and engaged, because so many people have come back to us since the 7th in the Jewish community. And if the only reason they do is because of anti-Semitism, I have a problem with that, because we're so much more than just our haters. We have so much to give and to love and to understand, that anybody that comes back and is just getting why they should stay out of guilt, it's unfathomable to me. Please, let's say Kaddish. So I want to say that we're honoring the Yortzites of the past week of Hannah Eldon, Rachel Amar, Philip Anderson, Muriel April, Muriel Batmaser, Jim Bear, Tali Becker, Samuel Bihar, Judah Birsovsky, Carol Berkowitz, Rose Stern, Balfine, Milton Berman, Hillel Byton, Max Brandis, Pamela Brandman, Michael Camrus, Joyce Mullery Clark, Miriam Cohen, Norman Cohen, Florence Kofsky, Charlotte DeRobin, Steve Charles Dresner, Herman Lewis Ehrlich, Lorraine Eisenstadt, Sean Epstein, Bill Feinstein, Fortuna Feldman, Jeanette Flansbaum, Helen Fleischman, Myron Forrest, Barry Freed, Jonathan Furry, Harry Gabriel, Douglas Gardner, Judy Gelfand, Merrill Gerard, Irvin Goldstein, Aaron Harris, Hannah Reich Hyman, Andrea Lehman Heft. Wow, we have a long list. We have a long list today. Irving Heitner, Meryl Hillerard, Alan Hirschfeld, Rhoda Greendorfer, Capfan, Steve Kleiman, Edward Lee Kosberg, Leah Elizabeth Louder, Anna Rose Levitt, Nan Lee Bernard, Seymour Levin, Irene Annie Levin, Ronald Lewis, Helene Gelson Lopez, Fernando Lozano, Joseph McCrone, Donald Isaac Magnin, Rabbi Edgar Magnin, Oliver Shalom, Mary Miner, Rose Miner, Marvin Burton Mayer, Rose Mayer, Helena Migdal, Elliot Milner, Tom Mintz, Florence Perlow, Theodore Peterman, Stephen Pitts, Quincy Plattis, Harold Polikoff, Anita Rabinowitz, Louisa Richards, Mark Rosenblum, Roberta Rosenthal, Bernard Roth, Reba Sardinell, Alex Satin, Faye Salad, Walter Schloss, Muriel Shofit, Charles Schwartz, Francis Seltzer, Ronnie Shapiro, Leah Sherman, Lester Sidney, Genevieve Simmons, Shmuel Simon, Rudolph Sims, Mayor Slifkin, Maya Severlik, Joan Tucker, Clarita White, Joshua Wiesel. Kaddish. V'yikadal v'yikadash shemei rabbah. B'yama divrach chirutei v'yimlich malchutei. B'chayechon u'b'yimechon u'chayedachol beit Yisrael. B'adalah u'b'zman kariv yimru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah meborach le'olam u'yomei u'maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal. Shemei dekudashat b'reichu. Le'elal. Min kabir chata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiram ba'alma v'imru amen. Hey shlam rabba min shalmaya b'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Osei shalom b'imramav huya asei shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. And with that, I wish everybody here a beautiful, blessed Shabbat. Thank you for joining, and God bless each every one of you.
Thank you, Jonah. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.